I am Sunny Carter, 17, a high school student in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where oak-lined streets and red brick houses hide secrets behind their cheerful facades. My family, of Indian descent, lives under a suffocating tradition. Women must remain silent after their 16th birthday, wearing a red thread on their wrist as a mark of submission. Our voices are treated as poison, and anyone who dares speak out risks being locked in a dark room, or worse. I've watched my uncles boast about keeping their wives and daughters silent, as if controlling another person's words were a badge of honor. The walls of our home are lined with unspoken rules, each corner a reminder that curiosity and defiance are dangerous. Yet somehow I never learned the art of silence. My thoughts spill over unfiltered and loud, refusing to be contained by tradition or fear. Even as a child, I would whisper questions that were quickly shut down, my voice trembling but persistent. I could never hide my anger or frustration behind a polite smile, and every time I tried to obey, it felt like wearing a costume that suffocated my very being. I hated the thread, hated the rules, hated the invisible chains that seemed to wrap tighter with every passing day. I am Sunny, and silence was never my language, but in a house built on obedience, that makes me a constant threat. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I loved singing loudly, laughing until my ribs ached, and making all sorts of ridiculous noises just to hear my friends burst into laughter. It was as if sound itself was my rebellion, a way to mark my existence in a world that tried to erase it. When I was 14, I discovered American Sign Language (ASL) in Ms. Lydia Harper's class. She was 35, full of energy and warmth, with a smile that made the letters in the air feel like magic. My heart raced the first time I realized that these gestures, these movements of the hands and fingers, could be a lifeline. My family had been living in the United States for years, yet they clung to an ancient tradition. After turning 16, girls were expected to fall silent, sent back to India to marry and bear children. The thought of being silenced, of having my voice stripped away, terrified me. Learning ASL became my secret rebellion. Each lesson with Ms. Harper filled me with adrenaline. Every time she looked my way while I signed, I felt a spark of freedom ignite inside me. If my parents ever discovered what I was doing, they would lock me in the basement without a second thought. Everything shifted during our family's Diwali party when I was 15. The house smelled of spices and candles, laughter mingling with the soft hum of classical music, but my eyes found Ava, my 18-year-old cousin. She had been silent for 2 years. She sat at the far end of the long dining table, her body rigid, shoulders hunched, tears quietly tracing down her cheeks. I could hardly watch her like that. Slipping a small scrap of paper into her hand, I wrote, "Meet me in the garden shed." Later that night, under the dim glow of a single bulb, I taught Ava and her younger sister, Lily, 12, their first signs. Simple words, phrases that felt revolutionary in their power. Friend, help, free. Their eyes lit up with a mixture of fear and wonder, and in that moment, I realized I was not just teaching language. I was giving them a voice, a secret rebellion against a system that sought to silence us. From that night onward, we became a hidden network, a clandestine group of 10 girls, ages 9 to 15, meeting whenever we could steal a moment. Sometimes it was in the middle of washing dishes, hands submerged in warm, soapy water, hiding the subtle movements from prying eyes. Other times it was under the cloak of darkness behind the garden shed, fingers dancing in the moonlight, learning to communicate without sound. We whispered warnings to each other, shared small triumphs, and practiced signs that would let us escape the suffocating rules imposed on us. Every session was both terrifying and exhilarating. The risk was immense. One slip, one glance from a parent could undo everything, but the reward was greater than any fear. In that secret language, we found freedom, solidarity, and the first taste of control over our own lives. For the first time, I felt like our voices could not be stolen, our laughter could not be silenced, and our spirits could not be broken. We were just ordinary girls, but together we were unstoppable. Our hands weaving a quiet revolution in a world determined to keep us mute. We began creating our own secret signs. A wrist wave meant, "They're coming closer." A thumb tap meant, "Continue later." Each subtle gesture was a lifeline, a way to communicate in plain sight. Over time, I noticed my mother and aunts catching on. They didn't scold us or stop our practices. Instead, their eyes held a mixture of worry and quiet pride, as if they understood the danger yet respected our courage. It was a fragile alliance, silent yet powerful, that kept us going. The tragedy arrived unexpectedly, wrapped in the guise of celebration. My cousin Tara, only 16, was being married off to Mr. Varun, a 60-year-old businessman, chosen because of her perfect silence. The house glowed with ceremonial lights, the scent of marigolds thick in the air, and the hum of prayers echoing in the hall. But my heart sank as soon as I saw Tara's expression. Fear, confusion, resignation, all masked beneath a forced smile. It was Lily who alerted me first, signing frantically from across the crowded room. "He hits her." My eyes followed her hands to Tara's arms, where pale bruises bloomed like dark, telling flowers against her fair skin. My stomach twisted. The air felt impossibly heavy. Guests chatted around us, oblivious, while I struggled to contain the rage building inside me. Every instinct screamed to stop what was happening, to expose the cruelty hidden behind the veil of tradition. When Mr. Varun prepared to recite the final vows, my fear turned into action. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the marble floor, and shouted, "Tara doesn't want to marry him. He hits her." The words exploded into the room like a bomb, silencing the murmurs, then scattering panic in every direction. Faces turned, eyes wide, the chatter halting into a tense, stunned silence. My father, Arjun Carter, 45, a stoic engineer, grabbed my hand and leaned close, whispering with a mixture of anger and shame, "Sonny, what?" But before he could pull me down or hush me, 6 more girls, some who had remained silent for years, stood up. Their courage mirrored mine, their voices trembling yet unbroken. "We know about the abuse," one girl screamed, her voice echoing through the grand hall. Then came the blaring sirens outside. Someone had called the police, reporting an illegal wedding, and the sound pierced the walls of the house like a trumpet of justice. Within minutes, uniformed officers and child protection personnel stormed in, breaking the tension into controlled chaos. They moved swiftly, escorting Tara away for examination, meticulously documenting the bruises and signs of abuse. My heart pounded as I watched them work, a mixture of relief and fear churning in my chest. In the confusion, my uncle Ravi, 50, a family doctor, attempted to drag Lily out of the hall, shielding her from the unfolding drama. A young officer, however, intervened, blocking his path, insisting on keeping all witnesses safe and accounted for. The air was charged, taut like a violin string about to snap, every movement amplified by tension. Mr. Varun tried to slip out the back door, but he didn't get far. Officers caught him in the alley, dragging him back as shouts and the clamor of the wedding guests reverberated behind them. The triumph of justice was messy, loud, and almost surreal. Meanwhile, my father yanked me toward the car, his hand gripping my arm so tightly I could feel the bruise forming even before we reached the safety of the driveway. I winced but didn't resist. The moment wasn't about me. It was about Tara and every other girl whose voice had been stolen. My mother, Priya, 42, a quiet homemaker, stayed inside, hands folded in prayer, her eyes avoiding mine. I could feel her fear, her resignation, the weight of a tradition she could not confront. Back at our house, the reprieve of safety was fleeting. My father locked me in my room, confiscating my phone and laptop. The door clicked shut, and the silence pressed against me like a physical force. Yet even behind the barriers, I wasn't truly alone. Through the tiny vent near the ceiling, I could hear him calling my uncles, his voice low and urgent, discussing how to hide the girls from school, how to manipulate the narrative, and the emergency meeting to convene at my grandfather's house. The words sent shivers down my spine. The fight was far from over. Inside my small, dimly lit room, I pressed my hands against the wall, feeling its cool, solid resistance. My mind raced. Every sign, every gesture we had created, every secret meeting we had risked, suddenly felt heavier. We had ignited a spark that could not be extinguished, yet I understood the full cost now. the wrath of our families, the potential isolation, the fury that would follow. Yet even as I sat there, locked away, adrenaline and fear mixing into a tight knot in my chest, I couldn't suppress a small, fierce satisfaction. We had stood up. We had exposed the cruelty that had been hidden in plain sight. Tara's screams, her trembling hands, the realization that she would finally be heard. These were victories that no punishment could erase. And we, the 10 girls who had dared to speak in secret, had become more than silent victims. We had become witnesses, activists, a clandestine force of courage. Hours passed. The house grew quiet, but tension lingered like smoke. I listened to footsteps in the hall, muffled voices, and my father's muttered plans. I realized that while this chapter had ended with law enforcement intervening, the story was far from over. The network we had built, the secret signs, the clandestine lessons, the quiet, unwavering defiance, was now more necessary than ever. The walls of our home could try to contain us, but our hands, our voices, our spirit could not be locked away. I lay back on my bed, exhausted but unbroken, thinking of Tara, Ava, Lily, and the other girls. The bruises on their skin were temporary. The courage we had ignited would last. And even as I heard my father moving about, plotting and scheming, I knew one unassailable truth. Silence would no longer be our language. That night, Aunt Mira, 38, a seamstress with nimble fingers and a soft, steady presence, sneaked a plate of rice and lentils to my room. She placed her hand over her heart, signing silently that she was proud of me. Her eyes glimmered with warmth, a quiet rebellion of their own. I couldn't speak, but her gesture filled me with a strange comfort, a reminder that even in a house full of rules, solidarity could exist. Before I left, she showed me the secret chat group of our cousins. Their words scrolled across my small, dim phone screen: thank yous, expressions of admiration, but also worry. Some feared the wrath of our elders. Some questioned if they had the courage to continue. Reading their messages, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. We were no longer just a group of girls sharing signs. We were a fragile network of voices that refused to be silenced. Yet we were painfully aware of the dangers that lay ahead. The next morning, my father drove me to Grandfather Vikram's house. He was 70, a retired teacher, and the architect of our family's 3-generation tradition of enforced silence. The house loomed like a fortress, red brick and formidable, every corner whispering of discipline and control. In the large drawing room, uncles and cousins gathered, forming a semicircle that felt more like a cage than a family reunion. Grandfather's eyes, sharp and unyielding, pinned me in place. He demanded that I reveal all the girls who knew ASL. My stomach twisted, adrenaline surging. I breathed, steadying myself, and only admitted to knowing about Tara. I refused to betray the others. Uncle Ravi, his face flushed crimson, accused me of poisoning their daughters' minds. I felt the anger and fear in the room pulse like a living thing, surrounding me from every side. One by one they brought in the girls. Lily was first, trembling, her small hands shaking as she was forced to admit she had learned ASL after my father's harsh slap. The confession broke my heart. I wanted to hold her, to protect her, but I was powerless. 8 more girls were interrogated, some confessing immediately, others resisting until threats and intimidation wore them down. Each admission tightened the invisible chains of fear around us, and yet, beneath it, a faint current of defiance lingered. Grandfather's voice boomed, declaring that all of us would undergo the silence ritual immediately, even those who had not yet turned 16. The words landed like stones, crushing the air around us. The room seemed to shrink, each breath heavier than the last. My heart raced with dread as I realized what awaited us. They dragged me to the basement, the walls cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Inside, there was only a single moldy mattress and a bucket of water. I sank onto the mattress, shivering, feeling the weight of isolation press against me. The door shut with a definitive click, leaving me alone in darkness. Outside, muffled voices argued and planned, the echo of authority a constant reminder of the power they held. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my trembling. Fear, anger, and a strange defiance twisted together inside me. I could not let the courage of Tara, Lily, and the others be erased by fear. Even in the cold, in the dim light of a single bulb, I felt a spark of resistance flicker. They could lock our bodies, but our voices, Our signs, our secret language, our rebellion were beyond their reach. For 3 days, I survived on cold rice and water, marking time by the shifting light through a small barred window. The basement was a cage of shadows, the damp air clinging to my skin. To keep my body from stiffening and my mind from unraveling, I exercised in silence, stretching and pacing across the narrow floor. I scribbled signs on the walls with a piece of chalk, each gesture a reminder of who I was and what I refused to lose. When exhaustion pressed too hard, I sang quietly to myself, whispers of favorite songs echoing faintly against the concrete walls, a fragile comfort in the oppressive darkness. On the 4th day, there was a knock that made my heart skip. Ms. Harper arrived, identifying herself as a school counselor demanding to see me. Grandfather Vikram tried to lie, claiming I was sick with the flu, but she was insistent. My father dragged me upstairs, tossing me a clean sari as if to disguise my humiliation, whispering threats that if I betrayed them, my cousins would pay the price. Before Miss Harper, I feigned illness, lips pale and body drooping, but when my grandfather turned away, I subtly signed, "Help." My hands trembled, but the message was clear, a lifeline in plain sight. Miss Harper gave a small nod, reading the unspoken plea before she left. Immediately after, grandfather's rage exploded. He slapped me across the face so hard that blood trickled from my mouth. "I see your reflection in the window," he hissed, eyes wild, a cruel warning that I could never escape his control. The next day, Miss Harper returned, this time accompanied by Janet Lee, 50, a stern, no-nonsense social worker. Together, they toured the house, inspecting locks, photographing barred windows, scrutinizing doors. My heart raced with both fear and hope. At the right moment, I deliberately dropped my ASL notebook. Pages fluttered across the floor, exposing my secret notes detailing the lessons I had taught my cousins. Janet bent down, eyes scanning the words, a flicker of understanding passing over her stern features. I allowed myself the briefest sigh of relief. Someone knew, and that knowledge could not be taken away. After they left, the house sank into tense silence. Grandfather called an emergency meeting. His voice echoed with authority, declaring that the silence ritual would take place that very evening. There would be no delay. The finality in his tone made my stomach churn. There would be no more hiding, no more postponing. When evening fell, we were dressed in white saris, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against our skin. We were lined up by age, youngest to oldest. I stood at the front, shoulders squared, heart pounding. Behind me, Lily trembled, small and fragile, while the younger girls clutched their hands together in fear. Their wide eyes sought reassurance, and I wanted to tell them it would be okay, but I couldn't. All I could do was stand tall and meet their gaze with as much courage as I could summon. Grandfather began chanting in Sanskrit, the words thick and resonant, rolling over us like a tide of inevitability. The incense smoke filled the room, tangling with the air, making me dizzy. The heat of the ritual, the weight of expectation, the eyes of family watching with rigid judgment, it pressed against my chest like a physical force. My pulse thundered in my ears, every breath a labor. My father stepped forward, holding the red thread, hands trembling despite the mask of cold authority on his face. The red thread, a symbol of submission, gleamed ominously in the dim light. My stomach twisted, adrenaline and fear clashing. I could see the internal battle playing out in his eyes, obedience to his father, loyalty to tradition, and perhaps a shadow of doubt, but it was buried beneath the steel of control. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady my shaking limbs. I felt the weight of every cousin, every girl I had taught, every hand that had learned to sign in secret. The ritual was about to begin, and yet inside me, a small defiant spark refused to be extinguished. They could dress us in white, line us by age, chant their ancient verses, and hold their symbols of control, but the voices we carried within, the language we had forged together, and the courage that had already been awakened could not be silenced. The smoke swirled around us, curling into the corners of the room, filling our nostrils, masking our whispered fears. I clenched my fists beneath the folds of my sari, remembering every secret gesture, every small act of rebellion. Even as my father approached with the red thread, the enormity of the ritual pressed down on me. I understood one unshakable truth. While they could attempt to control our bodies, they could not touch the voices, the signs, the spirit we had nurtured. And in that moment, standing at the front of the line, I made a silent promise to protect, to resist, and to fight for every girl whose voice had been taken from her. I signed now to the girls. It was time. Adrenaline surged and we scattered, each of us heading toward the doors and windows we had memorized in advance. My legs burned as I dashed across the hall, every heartbeat pounding with fear and exhilaration. The house, which had always felt like a cage, suddenly seemed like a labyrinth of opportunity. I barreled into the kitchen, where the aunts were cooking, the scent of spices mingling with the tension in the air. I pleaded with them silently, signing desperately for their help. Most turned away, hesitant, paralyzed by years of conditioning. But Aunt Mira didn't move. She stepped in front of the doorway just as my father lunged toward me, a mix of fury and disbelief contorting his face. The other aunts quickly joined her, forming an unyielding wall of bodies. My pulse raced as the air crackled with the standoff, each second stretching into eternity. Then, unexpectedly, Grandmother Sita, 85, appeared. Frail yet commanding, her voice rasped but carried an undeniable force. She wrenched the red thread from her wrist, 60 years of silence and submission, and demanded her son stop immediately. The room froze as she spoke, recounting the countless girls ruined by this tradition, the pain of her own silent suffering echoing through every word. The weight of history hung heavy in the air. Yet for the first time it felt like it might bend. Grandmother methodically cut each red thread from the ceremonial table, her movements deliberate and resolute. "You must speak," she instructed the aunts. One by one they followed, breaking decades of silence. My mother tore the red thread from her wrist, her hands trembling, and for the first time in years called my name aloud. The sound was small but thunderous, a signal that the spell of fear was cracking. Some aunts wept, overwhelmed by relief and guilt. Others laughed, incredulous at the sudden liberation. My father and uncles froze, their faces pale. Their authority, built over generations on control and tradition, evaporated in an instant. The rigid structure of power that had dictated our lives dissolved into chaos, replaced by voices long stifled and finally freed. The room erupted into a storm of emotions, shouts, tears, laughter, and angry denials all tangled together. The meeting dissolved in disarray. My mother, standing tall despite the tremor in her hands, confronted my father directly. She called him weak, a man hiding behind outdated traditions, incapable of facing the consequences of his own actions. Some families within the room fractured under the strain. Aunts threatened to leave if their husbands did not change, while younger cousins clung to each other, wide-eyed but emboldened by the sudden shift in power. I watched, heart pounding, as the fabric of control my father and uncles had woven for decades unraveled before my eyes. The red threads lay scattered on the floor, symbols of submission reduced to broken pieces. In that moment, our hidden network of girls, the lessons, the secret signs, the defiance we had nurtured in whispers and shadows, was validated. Our courage had sparked a revolution within the very walls that sought to contain us. Grandmother Sita's gaze swept the room, filled with both disappointment and hope. She did not raise her voice, yet every word she spoke resonated like a bell. Freedom begins with speaking, and courage is louder than tradition. Around me, mothers, aunts, and girls alike began to whisper, to cry, to laugh, a cacophony of liberation. Even as chaos swirled, a strange calm settled over me. The chains that had bound our voices were gone, replaced by a raw, unshakable power. The right to speak, the right to exist, the right to resist. For the first time, the house felt like home rather than a prison. The echoes of tradition had been challenged, and the voices of women, young and old, rose in a chorus that no thread, no ritual could silence. In the weeks that followed, our family fractured in ways that felt both terrifying and liberating. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Some relatives avoided eye contact in stores, others whispered behind closed doors. My cousins and I formed a secret Facebook group, a safe digital space to share resources, warnings, and support. Every post, every emoji, every check-in was a small act of resistance, a declaration that we would no longer be silenced. Ms. Harper connected us with lawyers and counselors who specialized in cases of abuse. Slowly, some of the reports we filed reached the right authorities, and a few of our uncles found themselves facing legal consequences for their actions. Justice was uneven and slow, but it arrived in increments, tangible proof that the world outside our house could protect us when our own family could not. The broader community was split. Some families clung to tradition, refusing to speak to those who had rebelled. Others quietly adopted a more progressive approach, questioning the rules that had bound us for generations. My grandfather tried to convene a meeting of elders to punish families who had defied the old ways. But Grandmother Sita, ever indomitable, organized a far larger gathering. Over 200 women came together, boldly exposing decades of abuse and secrecy. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon the truth of our family's traditions, once hidden, was in the public eye. Amid this upheaval, my mother found work at a preschool, finally fulfilling her dream of teaching. My father, whose conservative boss could not tolerate the scandal, lost his job. Yet slowly he began learning ASL from me, signing "I'm sorry" in the awkward, halting way of a man unlearning a lifetime of control. Some of my cousins moved in with more progressive relatives. Others were sent back to India. Despite distance, we maintained contact through calls and texts, keeping our network alive. Grandmother Sita became a symbol of courage, traveling between families, persuading them to abandon the oppressive traditions that had once defined us. When she passed, hundreds of women attended her funeral, sharing stories of the first words they had spoken aloud, the first signs they had dared to make. Her legacy was not just survival. It was the reclamation of voice, autonomy, and dignity. By the time I graduated high school, I had earned a scholarship to study social work, determined to help girls escape cycles of abuse. The organization I co-founded received funding to open classes teaching ASL and self-protection skills. We transformed our pain into a resource, ensuring that other girls would never have to endure the silence we had suffered. At the final Diwali before college, I counted 25 women laughing, debating, and singing together. My father and uncles were there, helping cook and quietly listening to their wives and daughters. I held the red thread in my hands, the same symbol of submission that had once dictated our lives. With a steady motion, I cut it and threw it aside. That thread no longer had power over us. We had reclaimed our voices, and nothing, neither fear, tradition, nor oppression, could take them away again. From this journey, I learned 5 crucial lessons that I carry with me every day. 1. Courage is contagious. One act of defiance can ripple outward, inspiring others to find their own strength. It only takes one voice to start a revolution. 2. Community is protection. Whether it's a network of friends, family, or allies, solidarity provides the safety and resilience needed to challenge even the most entrenched systems. 3. Silence is never submission. Choosing to speak, even in secret, keeps the mind sharp and the spirit alive. Our voices, once reclaimed, are our most powerful tools. 4. Change requires persistence. Traditions, no matter how deeply rooted, can be challenged over time. Incremental victories, legal action, awareness campaigns, education, accumulate into real transformation. 5. Healing is active. Recovery is not passive. Teaching, mentoring, and empowering others transforms personal trauma into collective strength, ensuring that lessons learned are passed forward. If you've been inspired by our story, remember, your voice matters. Share this story with friends and family, and let them know that courage can flourish even in the darkest of places. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, empowerment, and hope. Together we can create a world where every girl, every woman has the freedom to speak, to act, and to thrive.